So welcome to this webinar, getting the most out of the conference, what to do before, during and after the conference. This is actually the 12th ISPAH webinar and we're holding it in conjunction with ISPAH. So we've got three presentations today, followed by an interactive discussion. The first presenter will be Dr. Joey Murphy. He's a postdoc researcher at the Irish Physical Activity Research Collaboration, and he's also the secretary of the ISPAH Early Career Network. Next up, we'll have Professor Amanda Daly, who is a professor of behavioural medicine at Loughborough University. And then also at Loughborough University, we'll have Dr. Lauren Sherar, who is a reader. So, without any further ado, we will start with Dr. Joey Murphy, who brings an early career perspective today.
Yeah, so everybody should be able to see them slides now. Thanks a million for having me as a speaker on this webinar, Tepi and Rachel. So yeah, as Tepi alluded to, I will be looking at it from an early career researcher's perspective. And also I'd like to just state a lot of this is my own experiences, and hopefully some other people will be able to find some of the tips and helpful for their own conferences coming up this summer. So first of all, who am I? So I have a degree in sports science and health from Dublin City University in Ireland, followed up by a PhD in physical activity and health from University of Limerick more recently. I just earlier this year started a postdoc research role as part of the Irish Physical Activity Research Collaboration, and also a research assistant for Keep Youngsters Involved, which looks at sports dropout in youngsters. And then just a little thing about, I love all types of activities really, anything that comes in any form of physical activity in lots of different sports I take part in. Just kicking off, looking at before the conference, tips that I would kind of advise people to do before they attend. First of all, beginning with what conferences are available, and also the conferences that may not be in your area. Mainly asking the questions around what will you gain, who will be attending, and why would you attend. So starting to ask those questions and trying to pick the ones that we'll get the most out of by attending. This comes from my own kind of experiences of attending conferences like ISPAH, but also looking outside of that and going towards coaching conferences and conferences that link in with mental health. So things that I was also interested in that I thought might help my research. And this also helped me interest people that I wasn't used to seeing, or maybe might not have met by going to just the physical activity and health conferences. Second now will be investigate available funding either for conference fees or travel costs, especially as an early career researcher and maybe as a PhD student. There sometimes are funds within your university or as travel funds as part of the conference organising that you can tap into and try and assist you with attending the conference. And also another tip would be especially if it's held in your country, to check if you can volunteer, as it's a good way to attend and avoid the high costs. Next would be to look beyond the conference. By that I mean looking at what social events might be being run, what courses and workshops might be being run. It can be a good way to hit two birds with one stone if there's a good course being run before or after the conference. And also look towards the early career networks, because they're running events, so ISPAH will run events, and like ISPAH do, and also the special interest groups that you might be able to tap into, and they might be running events like such as from ISPAH the implementation workshop, or SIG is running a walking event. So looking out for those things outside of the conference that might help you meet people that are also interested in the same area and meet people at the same stage of your career. And then finally, don't be afraid to attend a conference alone. There's massive benefits to attending a conference as part of a group, but sometimes you get caught up in just spending time with the people from your own research group. I've attended one or two conferences, I think 2 conferences now by myself, and I found them very useful for kind of forcing me to meet new people and get to know new people in my field. And just looking at before the conference with regards to poster presentations, I think I only have a few key tips on each one. So first it would be to get creative, try and use diagrams and infographics if you're trying to create a catchy poster, and using an informative title so people know what your poster is about in the conference abstract booklet. but also catchy designs to try and help gather some attention while at the poster sessions. Presenting your poster to others before you print it is a massive one, because I've had this myself where I might have left in a mistake, or the design could have been better if I had shown it to people beforehand. And then when presenting the poster, try to add to the information already provided, as opposed to just reading off the poster slide or the poster presentation. So trying to add on to the more information than what's already available on it. With regards to oral presentations, sometimes less is more. I find, for myself anyway, it's having less content and not cramming the slides. And the way I kind of look at it is, if I'm not able to read the content on the slides within the time given, more than likely the people that are listening aren't going to be able to understand it, or aren't going to be able to grasp it. So I sometimes try and keep less on it. Again, present to others before you attend the conference, or even present to an empty room, just to build confidence with the work you're presenting. And then some people have always said to me, should I use a script or should I not use a script? I think it's whatever people are comfortable with. For myself, I would have started by using a script when I first started presenting, but I've moved away from it now and tried to keep it as a more casual and less scripted when presenting. So that's everything with regards to before the conference. Then during the conference, I think this will be a common one across all of our ones, but just planning your day using the book of abstracts. So going in, looking at it, what talks you're going to go to, what poster presentations. Presentations can be stressful, but remembering people are genuinely interested in your work. So when I first started attending conferences, I looked a lot like that bottom diagram, stressing, heart racing before the presentation. But when you start to relax a little bit beforehand and just remember that people aren't there to attack you, they're there because they're genuinely interested in hearing your work. So once you start to remember that, you start to become a bit more relaxed in presenting. Don't be afraid to ask questions or approach a speaker after the presentation. It's one way I've been lucky enough to meet a lot of people who have been working in the same area as me. So I find that 99% of the time people seem to be very, very approachable, and they're happy to chat about their work after the presentation. And also use social media to promote the work and show what you're interested in. And this is also, for me, has been an easy way to keep track of the presentations I've liked through my Twitter account. So I'm able to go in there, look at the pictures I've taken, and it helps me follow up with people. Also, around the more social side of things, becoming involved in a special interest group or the early career networks as part of the conferences. As a member or on the committee, if you can, if spaces have become available on committees. Breaks can be a great time to meet new people. So if you are, especially if you're attending a conference by yourself, or you find yourself alone at the breaks, literally I plop myself down at a table with one or two other people and just start chatting. It seems to be a good way to meet people, and remember that you're not the only one in there that's trying to meet new people. Share contact details with your Twitter research. Make sure to share them, and engage with social activities during the conference, such as the walks, the yoga sessions, the social events then at the night time. Also a top tip that if you're going to stay out late, make sure you make the effort to be in early for the talks. And then if you do get the chance, a lot of them are held in, I've found a lot of wonderful places. Try and get out and see a bit of it, either before or after, or in between the end of the day and the dinners. Then after the conference, just reflecting on talks that you feel can be useful for your field of work. So just a little diagram down there just showing like how I would look at it. So looking at it from reflection and planning, which might build on my next experiences, and then again reflecting on it and observing what happened again. Keep in touch with people you have met at social events or conference talks, as these become to begin, or especially for me as I went through my PhD, they started to become the familiar faces that I saw, such as Tepi and a number of other early career researchers. Just they start to become familiar faces as you attend the different types of ISPAH, ISPAH, HEPA. If you can, and if you have the platform to create a short blog piece speaking about the best bits of the conference, another helpful way of reflecting, but also keeping track of what talks you found most interesting for your own work. So in our department, we have a blog that we have to add to kind of yearly or bi-yearly. So it's a good way to come up with content for that as well. And then finally, for me, especially going through the PhD again, or through the early career research stage, noting the questions that were asked during your presentations, as these sometimes become the types of questions that will get asked at your progression reviews and also your Viva presentations at the end of your PhD. Just kind of little tidbit then on how good things can happen from attending a conference. So back in HEPA, and Tepi will probably laugh at this now, but back at HEPA, that's when I first met Tepi in Zagreb. Just literally after a talk, we went up to each other after our talks, started chatting. That night we ended up at the social event together, and add on a year later, and I became the secretary for the ISPAH network, where Tepi, well, I had to get voted in, but yeah, so now myself and Tepi are working together, so it shows how connections can be built through the conferences with people that you mightn't have known even a year ago. And then finally, just thanks for having me, and I'll be at ISPAH and more than likely HEPA, so feel free to come up and say hello to me, and I'll be there. So if you do see me floating around, feel free to say hello. So that's it from me.
Brilliant, thank you, Joey. That was ace. I think relevant for everyone, but probably particularly relevant for early career researchers. I like the idea that you suggest that early career researchers, and particularly PhD students, don't need to stress too much, because the people attending your talk or your poster are genuinely interested in what you're talking about, and that was a really nice way that you put that. So yeah, particularly relevant for early career researchers, but our next talks perhaps spread more widely as well, so for more senior researchers as well. So we'll go now to Professor Amanda Daly.
Good morning, everyone. Well, it's morning for me. I'm not sure if it's morning everywhere else. So I've just got a few slides in relation to getting the most out of conferences. Most of my points will probably be more applicable to people who have a few years more experience of research, but hopefully early career colleagues will be able to get something out of these points too. So before I go, I always check the program, make sure I've got a clear idea what I want to get out of the conference. And often you go to conferences for different reasons. So I make sure I know what it exactly is that I would like to get out of this particular conference. I'm fortunate in that I don't always have to present. I know some universities say that you have to present in order to get the funding to go, but sometimes it's actually quite good just to go and be free and listen and involve yourself with things that are going on without the worry of having to present. So I think as your career goes on, if you can do that, I've found it really useful to just float around and to meet different people that way. I also check the program and have a clear idea of the people I want to engage with. So rather than take a broad brush approach, sometimes I'll actually kind of target specific people that I think would be useful to speak to, in addition obviously to going to their conferences. Maybe I've got a research idea or a particular question that I would like to ask them. So I'm very clear from the program who I want to engage with and who I'd like to meet. I also arrange meetings with key people before I get to the conference. I often find that when you get to the conference, it can be quite chaotic and you've got lots to do and lots of people to meet. So if you've got very specific people that you want to meet, I make a plan to meet those people at a specific lunch break or a specific coffee break, so I know that that meeting will definitely take place. Because don't forget, other people will have other meetings and other agendas as well. So it's important to make sure that your agenda and the things that you want to get are actually scheduled into people's programs. I also think about the keynote speakers in particular, and I focus on, is there any keynote speaker that I really would like to have a coffee with? And then what I might do is actually drop them an email and get schedule a specific time or a specific lunch break where we can talk about their research. Obviously, if you're a keynote speaker, once you get to the conference, it's quite difficult to give people your time. But if you know in advance that you've got a specific time with a keynote speaker that you'd like to meet with, then that's your time and that's your slot. I also have collaborators in different universities. So again, I always make sure I try and schedule the meetings before I go. And if possible, again, it's not always possible, but if possible, I sometimes go a day or two earlier, not to go and enjoy the sights of the lovely cities that we get to visit, but to potentially schedule meetings. I sometimes go to a local university that's hosting the conference to see what's going on there. Potentially there's a research lab that I'd like to visit, or a research team. So again, I try and make sure that I get the most out of the conference before it, but also in terms of visiting different people and different locations. During the conference, quite a long list here, so I won't dwell on all of these points. This is just a personal thing, but I try and stay on UK time. So for example, when we were in Hong Kong, I stayed on UK time the whole time that they were there. That did mean that I missed a few key sessions in the mornings, but it did mean that I was bright-eyed and bushy-tailed all afternoon, and it meant that I could network and socialise in the evening. So again, it's not always possible. I think 8 hours difference is probably the maximum, but I found that really useful in terms of my networking and being at my best when I needed to be. Obviously, be strategic with your time. There's a lot of time hanging around. Don't be a hanger around. Use your time constructively. You're only going to be there for 3 or 4 days, and so it's important to make most of the time work for you. And I think if you're scheduling meetings before you go, then you soon find that your time is well spent in terms of engaging and networking with people. Joey alluded to this, so be confident in approaching people that you want to speak to. We're all nice people, and be clear about what it is that you want to say, but definitely bite the bullet and go for it. I'll move down a little bit. So number 5, find out who knows who. So maybe somebody else can introduce you or get you in the right position at the right time. I always try and come away with the goal of talking to at least 2 people that I've never met before. They may not want to speak to me, but I always make sure that I can at least speak to them. And when we go into the presentations, I always try and sit next to somebody that I don't know and start the conversation. Good morning, hello. But I make a point of trying not to sit with the people that I sit with all the time and the people that I know. I try and make a point of getting out of my comfort zone and sitting with people that I don't know, I've never met before, and striking up a conversation. I try to be quite proactive. I'll be the one that says, hello, good morning, how are you going? Rather than waiting for people to come to me. If I'm doing a presentation at the end, so I might have a slide about asking for collaborators, asking for people that might be interested in having a conversation or talk about what I've just presented on. I think that's a good way of drawing people in and networking and bringing people and research ideas together. I've just got a personal goal about, if a conference is going to be worthwhile to me, I need to try and at least leave that conference with one good research idea that I can develop and take forward. And that means that I have to engage, I have to go to the posters, I have to go to the talks, because it's really important to me to have that one new research idea to take forward. Make a note of people that you could use as potential reviewers. So when you're busy networking and talking to people, think about who you're going to use for your potential suggested reviewers. And actually, if you start to engage with more people and have a conversation with them, then they may be a bit more friendly towards your reviewers of your papers and your grants in future years. I always go to the conference dinner. It's a great networking opportunity. I know that conference dinners can be quite expensive and not always possible. But I've found actually when people's guard is down a little bit more, you can have a bit more of a general conversation and get to know people, and often that can lead to further links and collaborations, and that's definitely worked well for me. Talked about not sticking with the people that you know, and obviously go out and enjoy yourself in the evenings, because as I mentioned, it's a great network opportunity for everyone. Then after the conference, so I always try and follow up on any contacts or presentations that I've been to straight away, because if you don't do it straight away, you'll never do it. So as soon as I get back, I'll drop people an email and say, hi, great to meet you, had a great coffee, had a great night, great lunch, but start to connect again. I think you have to be proactive and you have to be the ones to do that. And people will remember you for that, as a nice guy, as a good person to talk to. So I talked about that one idea that I try to leave the conference with. Again, as soon as I get back, I try and think about how am I going to develop that idea? Who am I going to bring together as part of that team? What next for that particular research idea? I always send follow-up emails to people that I've met. Again, they could be your next grant reviewer, your next reviewer on your paper. So you want to obviously give a good impression that you're a good quality researcher. Think about also the people who might be willing to come and do a talk as a result of the conversations and the networkings that you've had at the conference, and don't be afraid to invite those people to come and do a talk with you, particularly if they're in your area. And also you offer, so the people that you contact, perhaps you could drop a line and say, hey, it was great to meet you, had a good conversation, I'd be really pleased to come and do a talk at your university. Obviously that's a lot easier for universities in your own country, but just make the offer and put yourself out there, and I think those will be really useful. They're certainly very useful for me. So I think I'll leave it there, and I'll hand over to Tepi. Thank you.
Brilliant, thank you, Amanda. Yeah, that was great. That was certainly built on what Joey was saying for the early career researchers, and gave that slightly different perspective. So really, really good. Thank you. So next up is Dr. Lauren Sherar, and hopefully Lauren will be able to strike the match right down the middle between earlier and senior research.
Okay. Good morning, everyone. Yeah, so my name is Lauren Sherar. I'm a reader in physical activity and public health at Loughborough University. I actually did most of my master's and my PhD in North America, so I was based in Canada. So actually a lot of my conference experience was more with the North American conferences like ACSM, which are very big. So that was my early part of my experience. And then obviously I've been at Loughborough now for 7 years in the UK. And so I've had much more experience in Australia, Europe, and the UK for my conferences. I guess the perspective that I'm coming from is kind of reflecting back on my own experiences as an early career researcher and going to lots of different types of conferences, and also my experience supervising PhD students and also postdocs. And I guess some of my reflections and seeing what they do, seeing what works, what perhaps I would have done differently, or how I might advise people as I move forward. Now, there is quite a lot of overlap with what I'm going to say. So some things might be slightly similar to what Joey and Amanda said. I might take a slightly different take on it, or I might gloss over it if it's very similar. So before a conference, so I think Amanda mentioned this, but I think it's quite important to ask yourself what you want to get out of a conference. I think it depends on your point in your career. I think it also depends on the type of conference you're going to. So I do remember times where I was going maybe looking for a postdoc opportunity, and my kind of main objective was actually to network, and to network with specific people. Earlier on, it was very much building on my own PhD research, seeing how I might develop my own PhD work. So I think it really is quite different. I think often you can just be on this treadmill of conference going, thinking that you have to go and you have to have the same aims, but actually I think your objectives can be quite different depending on the delegates, the conference, and your time in your career. So I think spending a bit of time to think about what you want to get out of a specific conference, and maybe talking to your colleagues, your mentors, your supervisors about what they think you might be wanting to get out of a conference. I think satellite pre-conference meetings, even if they're slightly outside your area, are really important. The main reason for that is they tend to be smaller. So sometimes they might be capped at 30, 50, 80 delegates. So even if it's something that's maybe on a specific statistical technique, a specific methodology, you might not be using specifically now, but you might think might be useful in the future. Actually, if you go along and see who's organizing the meeting and who might be there, it actually, I think, is a great way to network often. And I mean, some of the people that I now work with now, I don't know if I ever would have met them at a massive conference, but I did meet them at one of these pre-conference meetings. I think this really relates to any point in your career, definitely relates now. The work never stops. So if you have 5 days, for example, that you want to take out to a meeting when you're at a conference, I think if you can really plan your time before and afterwards and not actually have a mountain of work to do while you're there. I've definitely been cited to say, oh, I'll still be on emails. I could still have a Skype call between, I'm staying at the conference hotel, so I can nip back between sessions. It's actually quite hard, and you never know what opportunities will come up when you're there. And as Amanda said, this is really kind of a special opportunity you have. It's often quite expensive. You travel quite far for it. So it's really good if you can kind of focus all your attention and not having to be nip off to do various emails and other duties from back at your work. I think being involved in a conference, it wasn't something that I was ever very good at. And I actually think if I was to think back when I was, say, a PhD or a postdoc, there wasn't a whole opportunity for early career researchers to actually be involved in organising conferences. I think Joey and Tepi really show how important it is. I think you become much more confident at a conference that you've helped organise. People know who you are, which I think is really useful. But I think it's really important for your career moving forward. I think suddenly actually eminent, very established researchers know who you are, not just because of your research, but because of the work you've done to organise a conference. So if I was to think back, it's something that would have been really good for my own career, and certainly for my own PhD students and postdocs, I do encourage it. So I think, again, Amanda mentioned this, plan your sessions. Who do you want to see, or what do you want to see? It's very easy to get burnt out at a conference, and I think some careful planning before you go can really help this. So especially early on in your career, everything is interesting, and you feel like you want to see everything, but actually being a little bit strategic, I think, is a good idea, and to know what your priority is. So you might have a few sessions which are the nice to see sessions that could drop off if you are feeling like you're losing concentration, which can happen at a conference. I think, again, Amanda mentioned this, I think setting up meetings is really important. I also think you can set up too many meetings when you're at a conference, so you feel like you're running between and you're only really meeting up with people that you've organised to meet up with. But I certainly agree with Amanda that setting up one or two is really important. It's something that seems to be more when you're established in your career, but actually I think early on, even if you're meeting up with another early career researcher, maybe a postdoc of a researcher who's very much in your area, I think it's a great opportunity just to connect with a different group that is really hard to do if they're over the other side of the world, which often they are. And I think booking accommodation, I put close-ish to the conference centre, is really important. Often it's really expensive, and if you've only got a small or a reasonable amount of funds to actually fund yourself to go, it is really tough, and you definitely get into this potential trap, I guess, of often the further and further you move away, the cheaper the accommodation becomes. So you're staying in an Airbnb, which is an hour metro journey to the conference centre. I think there is a bit of a danger with this. I think often you can't be as flexible with who you're going to see, and if plans change, you're always having to think about getting back to your place of accommodation in a safe manner. So if there is a way to strike a balance between having affordable accommodation but being closer to the conference centre, I think that's really helpful. And then practice an elevator pitch. Elevator, sorry, this should be, not elevate, an elevator pitch. I don't think this is about you or everything about yourself, but I think it's actually quite useful very quickly if you can say what your research or what your postdoc research or your PhD is about in a very, very short, concise manner. I think this is really useful. Quite often through a conference, you might 20, 30, 40 times be repeating this, and you often don't have a lot of time. So if you can do something which is very catchy, really says what you're doing, but very concisely, I think that's quite useful. So during the conference, this actually was reflecting on something that happened to one of my postdocs, a very diligent student, always working, very, very good. Went to a conference and attended absolutely every session, but had quite a lot of work still left to do on his own research. And so he missed the conference social, and it was a small conference. There was probably 60 people at it. The person who he would have sat next to at the small conference dinner was the person that he probably had cited most in his PhD thesis, and was certainly the person that he held in most high regard. We had no idea this person was actually going to be at the meeting, at the social dinner, and we also didn't know that he would be sat next to him. So I think it's just to recognise that that socials and these informal gatherings can often, as Amanda said, be more useful than actually attending their presentation. I think Joey mentioned this. I think having the confidence to ask questions, especially if you're at a really, really big conference like ACSM, I think requires a lot of confidence, but also requires a little bit of skill. And until you start doing it, I don't think that you don't get the practice in doing it. I also think that if you go to these big conferences, often it is only established professors that tend to be asking questions. Early career researchers are often closer and more up to date with the research that's happening than more established professors. And so I think it's really important to hear the views of early career researchers, but it can be intimidating. So if you're in a smaller setting, ask questions because it's practice. And the more times you ask and you hear yourself speak, the easier it becomes. Also, before you ask a question, you often introduce yourself. You say who you are and where you're from, and that can be really important because often there's a lot of people in the room and they then know who you are, and if you ask a good question, a question that resonates with them, they might follow up afterwards. I think spending time to meet different international delegates is really important. Often our conferences are really unique places, and as soon as you go to these unique places, you see a whole different set of delegates that aren't the usual suspects that you see at every other conference. Often these people are fantastic. They will be part of your network and your career moving forward. Obviously, global research is becoming more and more on the agenda, and you will never know when you will need a contact in China or in Brazil or in these other countries. So whether it's another early career researcher or an established professor, I think going to find and speak to people that, especially from the home institution, is really important. I'll skip past that one. So this one, this is thinking back to my own early experiences at a conference. I would often be one of these people that would be lined up after a keynote speaker to speak with them to ask a question. There would be 4 or 5 people ahead of me. After about 5 to 10 minutes, the keynote speaker had just run out of time and then would kind of move away. And so you would leave feeling a little bit disappointed that you hadn't had the opportunity to ask the question that you wanted to ask. What I would often do then, is if I missed that opportunity, would make sure that I knew all the posters that that person's research lab were presenting at. So other PhD students, other postdocs that were working with this eminent researcher. And I would go and see these posters. I would talk to these early career researchers who are working with this eminent researcher. And often through that, I would actually get a personal introduction to this person, which actually was probably better than a very hurried question after a keynote speech. And I think organising informal early career research socials or get-togethers is really important. In Canada, they were quite good at this. Canadians love other Canadians. Everyone loves Canadians. So quite often what we would do is if we were at a conference, they would actually put up a maple leaf. This was probably before social media. They would put up a maple leaf on like a conference notice board and say there will be drinks at so-and-so place. The other thing you can do is if you're at a thematic poster session and it's on, say, children's physical activity and health, you can actually say we're going to have a get-together, an informal get-together for early career researchers, for anyone that's interested in children's physical activity and health, for example. I think it's another really good way that's very informal to get to know other early career researchers. It really helps them out as well. And I think where you need, take some time out for yourself, go to the gym, go for a walk, do something just to kind of get yourself a little bit of headspace. I think, especially early on in your career, conferences can be quite overwhelming and they can be exhausting. So taking a little bit of a break is always a good idea. I struggled a little bit with the after, and I think these have both been touched upon, but I think following up with people you meet at conferences, even if it's a very brief email just to say how nice it was to meet them, is really a good idea. And I do think this was mentioned before, but presenting back to colleagues is really important. I think this is really useful also if sometimes an early career researcher might get a travel grant to go to a conference which is slightly different. So maybe it's more of an industry-based conference, a pharmaceutical one. Maybe you're in more medical field and you're going to a public health conference for the first time. And actually the insight that you can bring back to your lab to talk about the merits, the differences with different types of conferences, I think can be really useful. So sometimes it is about what you specifically learned from it, but sometimes you can be sharing a unique experience that can help your lab mates and your colleagues to know whether it's a good conference to go to in the future, and also some of the learnings that you've had. So I think that's about it from me. So I will pass back to Tepi.
Brilliant. Thank you, Lauren. That was really good. And I think it did do what we needed it to do. So married up the early career and the senior perspectives and struck that down the middle. We've been busy collating some questions behind the scenes that I certainly wanted to ask, but I think we'll start with Rachel, who's got a question.
Yeah, they were great presentations, thank you. And it was great to get perspectives from, I guess, 3 different points of view. Thought it was interesting that a lot of the things that you talked about overlapped, but there were definitely some unique perspectives from each of you. So I was just thinking, it sounds like being brave is a big tip from all of you. So make sure that you're social, you ask questions at sessions, you sit next to people at conference dinners, etc. So I'm just wondering if you'd be willing to share with us any great connections that you've made because you've been brave enough to go and sit next to new people.
I guess, I'm just trying to think, I guess you all know Ralph Maddison. I guess a lot of the people in the webinar will know Ralph Maddison. He's the current president of ISPAH, and I first met Ralph about 20 years ago at a conference in Sydney, actually, and I just happened to be sitting around, and he came and sat down next to me, and I was brave enough to strike up a conversation with Ralph, and we've been friends for 20 years, and we've been working together, and it's been a good relationship. And had some good collaborations with him. So I think that relationship was based on me being brave and saying hello to him. Obviously, he's a nice guy anyway, and he started chatting away. But I think that's probably one of the memorable, outstanding sort of decisions that I've made in my career.
Awesome, thank you. And Joey, you met Tepi, you were willing to share that with us, so that was a great experience for you. Are there any new other collaborations as an early career researcher that you've made, which you've been brave enough at a conference and it's turned into something, you know, really exciting for you?
Yeah, no, other main one was from attending workshops before the conference. I've managed to make some collaborations that now I'm lucky enough to be working on different projects with, or different papers with. So yeah, definitely. And that was literally because it's so easy to go to a workshop, but kind of just disappear afterwards. Whereas like what Amanda and Lauren were saying, literally following up straight after the conference and keeping in touch straight away, so that people straight away, well, they remember you, but also that it can probably the best time to try and build on a collaboration. So yeah, definitely having the confidence to contact somebody straight after the conference helped massively.
Right. And Lauren, are there any collaborations that you've made as a result of conferences that you wanted to share?
Yeah, I guess as a very early career researcher, as a master's student, I attended the ACSM conference, and my supervisor at last minute couldn't attend with me. I was absolutely terrified. And so I presented the very first session of the conference. And then I think it was the second day, I walked past someone that I recognized. I was wading through his textbook. It was Professor Bob Molina, which some people might be aware of. And yeah, he was certainly the research that I was reading at the moment, very embedded in my master's thesis. And so I just walked up to him and introduced myself. It helped that he knew my supervisor, which I guess is always quite nice and in when you're talking to someone from afresh. But since then, he's been a really good mentor. I've published with him. Any opportunity, I send him an email, we chat on the phone if I need any advice. And so he was probably the first person that I approached, and it really did pay off for my whole career, I think, and we've become good friends. So I could thoroughly recommend it if people have the opportunity.
Great.
There is one more question, Rachel, from the floor.
Yep, you go for it, Tepi.
Okay, so Brittany Johnson's asked a question. So do you use social media to promote your presentations in advance or during the conference? And if so, what would the best way to do this be without it sounding like self-promotion? I think Joey would be a good one on this one. Joey, you're quite good at this sort of stuff.
Yeah, I don't know how it's not supposed to sound like self-promotion is probably the problem. Yeah, no, what I might do is I might throw up a tweet before, about an hour and a half before the presentation, and kind of a brief kind of comment on what the presentation is going to be on, and if people are interested, it's going to be happening in such and such a room at such and such a time. I that's one thing I usually do before the presentation. A lot of the stuff would happen after the presentation, where I might tweet pictures or kind of comments that were asked at the presentation. So yeah, but just beforehand I might throw up a short tweet saying briefly, if anybody's interested in this topic, I'll be presenting it at whatever room at this time. That's what I usually do.
You got anything to add to that, Amanda, Lauren? I know certainly from my perspective, I think people shouldn't be scared of self-promotion. I think that's not something that, especially in your early career, you want to put yourself out there as much as possible. So that's how I'd have said it, but it's not me to answer the questions. So Amanda or Lauren?
I'm not a big social media technology type of person, so I'm not very good at that sort of stuff. I'm a bit of an old timer, but it is useful on Twitter, you know, even a few days before, when people tweet their presentations or when they're going to speak. It kind of focuses the mind a little bit on the things that I might like to go to. I mean, hopefully I've looked at the conference program already, but it does put you in the minds of other people as a talk that you might want to go to. So if you're worried about self-promotion, you can always ask a colleague or a friend to actually tweet it for you, so it doesn't sound like you're promoting yourself. So you can do that indirectly, and I've seen that done, and that's quite a nice way to do it too.
Great, perfect. All right, so I think that concludes the questions from the floor, and just leaves me to say a big thank you to the speakers who've put together their slides today, and their presentations been really helpful. So yeah, one great big thank you to the speakers, and see you on the next webinar.